Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
I should have known something was off when Ava posted the first beach photo and tagged the girls without tagging me. It wasn't the usual curated vacation snap either. It was a wide-angle shot, 6 women, all perfectly sun-kissed and holding champagne like it was an accessory, posing on the deck of some luxury Airbnb in Malibu. The caption read, "Success isn't just what you do, it's who you do it with. #sisterhood, our CEO life." I stared at it longer than I should have, not because I was jealous, but because there was a familiar ache behind my ribs I hadn't felt in years. The kind you get when you realize you've been erased from a photo you were never invited to be in. The group chat had gone quiet for a couple of weeks, which wasn't unheard of. Life gets busy, people drift, messages get buried. But this silence had weight to it. No memes, no check-ins, just dead air. And then that post. I scrolled through the comments, Laura laughing about someone's suitcase getting lost, Jen tagging her husband who replied with heart emojis, and Ava commenting back with inside jokes I hadn't heard since college. I scrolled and scrolled, searching for any hint that this was a public thing, that maybe I just missed the email or forgot to respond. But there was no trace of my name anywhere. That photo wasn't missing me. It had never included me in the first place. When I finally messaged Ava, I kept it simple. "Hey, looks like a fun trip. Didn't know something was happening?" I watched the 3 little dots bounce on my screen for longer than I expected. She was typing, stopping, typing again. When the reply came, it was the kind of polished cold that only Ava could deliver with such ease. "Hey babe, yeah, it was kinda last minute. We just wanted to keep it small, you know? Nothing personal, just the usual girls who've really kept up over the years. The successful ones, lol." I didn't respond. I read that message 3 times, the LOL hanging like a noose around the word successful, the way someone tries to dull the blade after they've already cut you open. "Nothing personal," she said, as if that somehow makes being excluded from people who once called you a sister sting any less. I sat there holding the phone like it might suddenly offer more context or soften her words. But it didn't. That was it. A casual dismissal disguised as a friendly update. And it wasn't just Ava. I checked Laura's and Jen's pages too. Same trip, same captions, same silence about who wasn't there. There had been a time, not long after college, when we used to dream out loud about where we'd end up. We called ourselves the Ladder Club because we were going to climb high together, careers, husbands, beach houses. And now it turns out, I was the rung they decided to skip. Here's the part I didn't mention. For the past 4 years, I'd been working in silence, locked in behind a project that no one even knew existed. While they were posting their promotions and Peloton stats, I was building something no one had time to ask about. I wasn't posting, I wasn't bragging. Hell, I wasn't even sleeping some weeks, but I was building. And now, with Ava's message still sitting unread on my phone, I walked over to my desk, sat down, and opened the folder I hadn't touched in months, the one titled Phase 1. There was a contract draft inside. 5 years of my life packed into legalese and projections. No glitter, no Instagram captions, just substance. Just something real. Do you ever have that moment when the pain stops being pain and becomes fuel? It's not that I wanted revenge. Not exactly. I just wanted to be impossible to ignore. To become the kind of success that didn't need anyone's permission. The kind of woman who no longer cared about being left out of beach photos, because she was too busy signing deals that made those same women check the news twice. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone you trusted tell you you're not enough? Casually, without malice, just a brush off as if your worth was a punchline they forgot to deliver? And did you ever let it sink in so deep that it lit a fire you didn't even know you had? Because that's where I was, and that night I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't write some long, emotionally intelligent journal entry. I just stared out my window, the LA skyline twinkling like it had no idea who I was yet. And then I smiled, just a little. The kind of smile that says, "Fine, you wanted a success story? Let me show you how this one ends." Most people assume that success, when it finally comes, crashes through the door like a SWAT team, loud and unmistakable, full of adrenaline and confetti. But the truth is, it usually sneaks in through the back, unnoticed, silent, while the world is too busy watching someone else. That was the irony of it all. While Ava and her curated circle were busy chasing clout and clinking glasses on rented decks with hashtags that echoed like hollow mantras, I was buried under a mountain of code, legal documents, sleepless nights, and whiteboards filled with equations and deadlines no one ever asked about. They wanted visibility. I was building something with roots so deep it didn't matter who saw it, because it was never about being seen. It was about building something that could not be ignored. 4 years earlier, I'd turned down an offer from a comfortably prestigious firm that came with a guaranteed 6-figure salary, benefits, and a title I could have flaunted on LinkedIn like a Girl Scout badge. People said I was insane. My ex-boyfriend, Ryan, who was always more enamored with corporate ladders than actual ideas, told me flat out that I was making a mistake, that real adults didn't chase passion projects past the age of 25, and that I'd regret not having something respectable to lean on when things inevitably fell apart. I remember standing in my kitchen as he said it, him holding a beer, looking so smug, so certain, like he was gifting me truth wrapped in concern. But I didn't flinch. I just watched him talk, thinking how small his version of success was, how loud his voice was for someone so afraid to build something from nothing. My parents weren't much better. They loved me, of that I had no doubt. But they'd always been people who measured worth by stability, by monthly paychecks and predictable routines. My mom worked as a nurse for 30 years without missing a day, and my dad retired from the same construction firm he joined before I was born. In their world, risk wasn't ambition. It was recklessness dressed up as arrogance. Every time I tried to explain my project, how I was working on an AI-driven logistics optimization platform for underserved manufacturing markets, essentially using smart tech to streamline shipping for small companies in the Midwest, they nodded politely, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't get it. To them, it wasn't real until someone else validated it, preferably in a magazine or with a plaque. But I kept going. Every rejection, every doubtful glance, every moment of being left out of conversations because I didn't have a title that sounded fancy at dinner parties. It all became fuel. I worked out of a cramped studio apartment for years, taking consulting gigs on the side to keep myself afloat. I hired a small team of 3, 2 developers, and 1 operations lead, all as scrappy and obsessed as I was. We didn't have funding at first, we didn't have visibility, but we had something better. We had focus. And we built, not fast, not flashy, but solid, brick by brick. We tested our software with local manufacturers in Indiana, places no one else cared about. We shaved off inefficiencies, tracked savings, gave small businesses a chance to compete against giants. Slowly, word spread. 1 client became 10. 10 became 50. Investors started sniffing around, but I wasn't interested in vultures. I wanted partners, people who understood what we were doing, not just what we were worth. And then came the offer. $120 million, not a valuation, not a maybe. A signed, sealed acquisition by a major logistics conglomerate that had been quietly watching us for months. I didn't announce it. I didn't run to Instagram or tweet a thread. I just let the papers speak for themselves. And when I signed that deal, sitting at a worn-out desk I'd bought on Craigslist 5 years ago, I didn't feel the rush I thought I would. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt calm. I felt still, like I'd just walked through a storm and come out dry, while everyone else was still pretending it hadn't even rained. That afternoon, I took a walk. No fanfare, just me in the city, breathing like it finally knew who I was. My phone buzzed as I was standing on a street corner, waiting for the light to change. A voicemail. I put the phone to my ear. "Caroline, it's Tom. It's done. $120 million. They signed. You did it. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood there, letting the weight of those words settle in my bones. Not because of the number, not because of the money, but because that deal meant something more. It meant that I had built something powerful enough that no one could ignore it anymore. Not even Ava. Not even Ryan. Not even my own parents. It was strange, really, the way success arrived. No marching band, no champagne. Just a quiet acknowledgement that I'd done the impossible, without ever asking for their permission. And that, right there, was the beginning of my revenge. It's a strange thing to wake up and hear your name spoken by a stranger on national television, even stranger when the voice doesn't belong to someone you've ever met. Yet they're articulating details of your life, numbers, company names, the outline of your history, with a practiced ease that makes you wonder if perhaps they know you better than you know yourself. The television had been on in the background while I made coffee, some bland morning news segment about tech acquisitions, until my name, Caroline Mayfield, floated out of the speaker like a ghost from the past, tapping gently on the window, reminding me that anonymity was no longer mine to keep. I froze, fingers still wrapped around the coffee mug, staring at the screen as the news anchor shifted tone from generic business enthusiasm to a practiced sense of awe, the kind reserved for underdog victories and once-in-a-decade success stories. Behind her, the footage rolled, grainy video from the contract signing, one of the rare moments I'd allowed to be filmed, my signature sweeping across the bottom of the final page, the expression on my face calm but unreadable. The anchor spoke of the magnitude of the deal. $120 million, she repeated like it was candy in her mouth, emphasizing how the company, born in a one-bedroom apartment, had become a cornerstone solution for small manufacturers nationwide. She mentioned strategic disruption, visionary leadership, and female entrepreneurship in overlooked regions, all phrases I had neither coined nor requested. But I let them sit there anyway, letting the world draw whatever conclusions it needed to justify why someone like me was now worth listening to. The text started almost immediately, a buzzing storm of green and blue bubbles lighting up my phone like a fireworks show. Some came from reporters, some from old coworkers, but most, perhaps predictably, came from the very people who had written me off without a second thought. Jen's message was the first. Simple, vaguely panicked, full of pretend warmth. OMG, Caroline, just saw the news. So proud of you. Let's catch up soon. A few minutes later came Laura's version, slightly more polished, feigning sincerity with carefully crafted exclamation marks. Unreal, Caroline. I always knew you were doing something amazing. You have to tell me everything next time you're in town. But it was Ava's that made me pause. She didn't try to pretend we'd stayed close. She didn't even acknowledge the last message she'd sent, the one that had carved a scar into my memory, with the casual cruelty of being left out because I wasn't part of the successful ones. No, her message was short, almost cautious. Wow, you really did it. Congrats, Caroline. Hope we can talk sometime. No exclamation point, no pretend affection, just 6 words and a punctuation mark that felt more like a question than a sentence. I didn't respond, not to any of them. I watched the screen, then turned it off, letting the silence settle like dust on furniture no one had touched in years. I could have replied. I could have crafted some perfectly passive-aggressive response, something sharp enough to make them flinch, but polite enough to be reposted. But I didn't, because silence, I had learned, was more powerful than 1,000 clever comebacks. Silence made people sit with their guilt, their regret, their confusion. It didn't give them an out. It made them wonder. Later that evening, while the world still buzzed with my name like it had just discovered me, I drove to my parents' house. They had called that morning, both of them, which was rare. My mother's voice had trembled slightly when she left the voicemail, not quite sure what to say. Caroline, sweetheart, we saw you on the news. Your dad's been watching that segment 3 times already. If you get a moment, could you come by? He's proud. We both are. We'd love to see you soon. I hadn't been home in over a year. Not because of anger, not even because of distance, but because I couldn't bear to sit across from them while they asked me again if I'd considered going back to regular work, as if the thing I was building was just a phase I hadn't outgrown. But I went. Not for validation, for something quieter. I pulled into their gravel driveway just before sunset, the sky painted with those soft golds and deep purples that made the Indiana horizon look like something out of an oil painting. My father was waiting on the porch, still in his worn-out work boots, as if he couldn't quite believe this was real and had dressed in uniform just to remind himself of the world he knew. He didn't say anything when I stepped out of the car. He just looked at me, nodded once, and said, "You're on the damn TV, kid." And that was it. That was the closest thing to a proud of you I was ever going to get. And somehow it was enough. Inside, my mother had made dinner like she used to when I'd come home from college. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans cooked just a little too long. She hovered around me nervously, asking questions in bursts, unsure how much I wanted to talk. I told them the basics, left out the contract's technicalities, focused on the impact. I could see the shift in their eyes, the slow realization that the thing they'd never quite understood had turned into something undeniable. That night, after they'd gone to bed, and I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling fan, turning slow above me, I thought about all the years I'd spent explaining myself, defending my choices, trying to be seen. And now the world had seen me. But more importantly, the people who had dismissed me, Ava, Jen, Laura, even Ryan, they had seen me too. Not the version of me they used to ignore at brunch, but the one they couldn't unsee now. And I hadn't said a word. That was the best part. The real fireworks weren't the headlines or the interviews. They were the looks on their faces, the tremble in their texts, the uncertainty in their silence. Because in their world, the loudest voices always won. But I had won by being quiet, by building while they partied, by choosing the long road, alone. And that, I realized, was the beginning of something much bigger than revenge. It was the beginning of their realization that I didn't need them, never had. But now they needed me. Time has a way of stretching out oddly once you've reached the summit, especially when the climb has consumed every ounce of your energy for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to simply exist without urgency, without the buzz of pending deadlines and the low-grade panic of survival. After the acquisition closed and the media storm began to ebb, I found myself suspended in an unfamiliar calm, one where mornings no longer began with investor updates or panic about software glitches, but instead with silence, coffee, and the surreal feeling of being free. Not unemployed, not irrelevant, just untethered from the noise I had lived in for too long. But peace, as it turned out, wasn't all it promised to be, because while I had succeeded beyond what anyone could have imagined, including myself, there was still a part of me, small but persistent, that remembered every single moment of being dismissed, every smug smile, every time Ava steered conversations away from me at reunions because I wasn't working for a brand they'd heard of or didn't have a glossy title that looked good on name cards. And while I wasn't the kind of person who lived for revenge, I couldn't deny that the idea of seeing their carefully constructed composure crumble just a little, just enough to know they'd realized they'd misjudged me, offered a satisfaction no contract ever could. The message came in mid-November, about 4 months after the deal went public, when the buzz had cooled but the echo still lingered in certain circles. It was an email, oddly formal in tone, sent from Ava's professional address, which already made me suspicious, because she never used that unless she was trying to project power or impress someone. The subject line was simple: "Let's reconnect." I almost deleted it without opening, assuming it was another passive-aggressive attempt to loop me back into some version of the group that I had never truly belonged to, but curiosity won out. In fact, the message was polite, distant, and worded with the kind of polished precision that Ava used whenever she wanted something, but didn't want to appear as though she needed it. She congratulated me again, this time with slightly more warmth, and mentioned that the girls were planning another get-together, a more private one, no social media, no husbands or children, just a proper catch-up between old friends, as if the last exclusion had been a scheduling hiccup, rather than a deliberate curation of who was deemed worthy. She asked if I'd be willing to join them this time. She used the word honor, which was rich, considering 4 months ago I apparently didn't meet the entry requirements. I didn't respond immediately. I let it sit for a few days, pretending to be busy, when in truth, I was weighing not whether to go, but how to go because I would attend. That much was clear to me from the moment I read the invitation. But I wouldn't be showing up as some long-lost friend looking for reconnection. I would be showing up as a quiet reckoning. I wanted them to see me, not just my success, not the number they had probably memorized from the news, but the woman they had underestimated, the one they'd pushed to the edges of their curated lives, now standing in the center of their view, impossible to dismiss, and calmly aware of her own value. So I replied, polite, brief, confirmed my attendance, thanked her for thinking of me, and that was it. No fanfare, no so excited to see everyone, just enough to confirm that I was coming, but not enough to signal what they should expect. Then I began to plan. Not a speech. No, that would have been too easy, too obvious. What I had in mind was quieter, more deliberate, something they wouldn't see coming until it was already playing out in front of them. I made 2 calls that afternoon. The first was to a private chef I had met through a previous investor event, someone who specialized in intimate, high-end dinners that felt more like theater than dining. The second was to a small but skilled documentary crew, a woman I knew who had done beautiful, unobtrusive work filming the back end of startups, not for social media clout, but for legacy. I told her I wanted something subtle, elegant, with no narration, just footage, B-roll of my work, clips of me and my team, time-lapse of the early days, the whiteboards, the notes, the failures, the nights we slept in the office and ate from vending machines. I gave her access to everything and every email, every sketch, every late-night brainstorm I documented out of sheer habit. I told her to build a 5-minute piece. No commentary, just the truth, unadorned. When I imagined the dinner in my mind, I didn't picture raised voices or shocked gasps or anyone storming off. That would have been too dramatic, too performative. What I wanted, what I truly craved, was the moment after the silence fell, when they would sit there, wine glasses frozen midair, trying to recalibrate everything they thought they knew about me. I wanted to sit at the same table they had once kept me from and reclaim it, not with anger, not with resentment, but with the quiet certainty that I had never needed their permission to belong. So I set the date. I booked the venue. I chose the menu, thoughtfully, with flavors that nodded to our shared past, meals we used to eat together when money was tight and dreams were still abstract. I requested that the wine be poured slowly, not in haste, to allow time for each person to sit in their own unease. I made sure the video would play at the right moment, after dessert, when their defenses would be lowest, when the candlelight would make it feel too intimate to look away. And then I waited, not with impatience, but with anticipation, because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or cruel or even immediate. Sometimes it's simply being undeniable in the space where you were once invisible. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people drown in the weight of their own misjudgment, while you smile across the table and offer them another glass of wine. The evening air carried that specific weight only December could bring, a quiet chill that slipped beneath your coat and reminded you, without mercy, that some things you thought you had buried could still surface in the cold. The venue was set just outside the city, a private dining room tucked into the second floor of a converted estate that once served as a boarding school, and now functioned as the kind of intimate space that whispered exclusivity without ever needing to announce it. Every detail had been arranged with the care of a surgeon and the foresight of a woman who understood that the most unforgettable meals weren't about the food, but the silence that follows what cannot be unseen. They arrived one by one, each of them wearing versions of themselves they had carefully polished for the night. All glossy hair, expensive scarves, and a level of curated effort that screamed of intention. Ava was the first to walk in, still as poised and impenetrable as she had always been, her eyes scanning the room with the ease of someone who had been to 100 such dinners. Yet there was a flicker, barely visible but undeniably there, When she saw me already seated, calm, composed, and entirely unaffected by the reunion energy she had perhaps expected to orchestrate. Laura and Jen followed, their voices high with affected warmth, greeting me with hugs that were just a fraction too tight, their words laced with compliments that sounded more like confessions. There were no other guests, just the four of us, seated at a long rectangular table set beneath an antique chandelier, its dim light casting soft shadows on our faces, making us look both younger and older than we were, caught in the strange temporal blur that occurs when you're forced to confront who you were against who you've become. Dinner began politely, as all such events do, with safe questions and rehearsed answers. We talked about the weather, about holiday travel plans, about mutual acquaintances whose lives had taken turns. We could all agree were predictable or amusing or tragic, depending on how far removed we felt from them. I let them speak, nodding occasionally, laughing where appropriate, offering just enough engagement to suggest presence, but withholding the kind of vulnerability that would make them believe they still had access to me. They asked about the deal, of course, tentatively at first, then with increasing curiosity masked as admiration. "What was it like?" Jen asked, her voice light, almost childlike. "To have something you built get that kind of recognition?" I paused, letting the silence stretch, not to be dramatic, but to weigh her question with the seriousness it deserved. "It felt," I said slowly, "like confirmation, not of the money, but of every moment I was told it wouldn't work, every person who smiled politely while quietly writing me off." Ava shifted in her seat, her posture still impeccable, but her fingers tightening slightly around her wine glass. The chef brought out the main course, a delicately plated lamb shank with a reduction that smelled like slow ambition, and I watched as their conversation began to falter, as the undercurrent of unspoken tension rose to the surface like steam from their untouched food. When dessert arrived, small, beautiful domes of dark chocolate filled with pomegranate mousse, I gave the quiet signal to the server, and the lights dimmed further, the room now bathed in that kind of golden hush that feels sacred. A projector lowered behind us, silent, seamless, and the first frame appeared, a grainy video of me in my apartment, surrounded by chaos, speaking into the camera, with a voice tired but determined. No one said a word. The footage moved slowly, methodically, painting a picture of years most people wouldn't have bothered to look at. There were no filters, no glamour, just the truth of what it takes to build something real while the world pretends not to notice. It was the silent nights, the failure pitches, the edits at 2 a.m., the spreadsheets covered in red ink, the triumphs that came hours before breakdowns. It was everything they had chosen not to see, wrapped in 5 minutes of undeniable evidence that the person they had excluded was, in fact, the only one at the table who had done what they all pretended to admire. When it ended, no one clapped. No one needed to. There was a stillness that followed, dense, sharp, impossible to fill with small talk, and I let it breathe, not rushing to explain or soften the blow, because this wasn't about rubbing anything in. This was about holding a mirror up and letting them decide what to do with the reflection. Ava, for the first time in her life, didn't have a rehearsed expression. She looked at me, really looked. And there was something behind her eyes I hadn't seen since college. Not guilt, not regret, just recognition. "Why show us this?" she asked finally, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "What do you want us to say?" I leaned back slightly, feeling the warmth of the room against the cold that still lived somewhere deeper. "I don't want you to say anything," I said. "I just wanted you to see it, because this is the version of me that existed long before any of you decided whether or not I belonged." There were no apologies, no dramatic outbursts, just a subtle shift in air pressure, as if the room itself had recalibrated around a new axis. We finished dessert in silence. Later, as I stepped outside and felt the night wrap around me like a familiar coat, I heard the voice of the news anchor echoing again in my mind. Not the one from the morning show, but the one from the longer documentary segment that aired after the deal had settled. And that was Caroline Mayfield, securing the largest solo tech acquisition by a female founder in Midwest history. I didn't look back at the dining room. I didn't need to, because I knew that what had just happened inside would live with them far longer than any headline ever could. And as I walked to my car, the gravel crunching beneath heels that no longer needed to prove anything, I thought, not for the first time, that it was never about the contract or the money or the media. It had always been about the list, the one they made, the one I was left off of, and now they would remember mine. Even if they never spoke it out loud, especially then.